in distant ages, a sturdy, sentimental English Radical, with a large heart and a narrow mind. He could not help falling into that besetting sin or weakness of the modern progressive, the habit of regarding the contemporary questions as the eternal questions and the latest word as the last. He could not get out of his head the instinctive conception that the real problem before St. Dunstan was whether he should support Lord John Russell or Sir Robert Peel. He could not help seeing the remotest peaks lit up by the raging bonfire of his own passionate political crisis. He lived for the instant and its urgency. That is, he did what St. Dunstan did. He lived in an eternal present like all simple men. It is indeed a child's history of England, but the child is the writer and not the reader. But Dickens, in his cheapest Cockney utilitarianism, was not only English, but unconsciously historic. Upon him descended the real tradition of Merry England, and not upon the pallid mediævalists who thought they were reviving it. The pre-Raphaelites, the Gothicists, the admirers of the Middle Ages, had in their subtlety and sadness the spirit of the present day. Dickens had in his buffoonery and bravery the spirit of the Middle Ages. He was much more mediaeval in his attacks on mediaevalism than they were in their defences of it. It was he who had the things of Chaucer, the love of large jokes and long stories and brown ale and all the white roads of England. Like Chaucer, he loved story within story, every man telling a tale. Like Chaucer, he saw something openly comic in men's motley trades. Sam Weller would have been a great gain to the Canterbury Pilgrimage, and told an admirable story. Rossetti's Damoiselle would have been a great bore, regarded as too fast by the prioress and too priggish by the wife of Bath. It is said that in the somewhat sickly Victorian revival of feudalism, which was called Young England, a nobleman hired a hermit to live in his grounds. It is also said that the hermit struck for more beer. Whether this anecdote be true or not, it is always told as showing a collapse from the ideal of the Middle Ages to the level of the present day. But in the mere act of striking for beer, the holy man was much more mediaeval than the fool who employed him. It would be hard to find a better example of this than Dickens' great defence of Christmas. In fighting for Christmas, he was fighting for the old European festival, pagan and Christian, for that trinity of eating, drinking, and praying, which to moderns appears irreverent, for the holy day, which is really a holiday. He had himself the most babyish ideas about the past. He supposed the Middle Ages to have consisted of tournaments and torture chambers. He supposed himself to be a brisk man of the manufacturing age, almost a utilitarian. But for all that he defended the mediaeval feast, which was going out, against the utilitarianism which was coming in. He could only see all that was bad in mediaevalism, but he fought for all that was good in it. And he was all the more really in sympathy with the old strength and simplicity because he only knew that it was good and did not know that it was old. He cared as little for mediaevalism as a medievalist did. He cared as much as they did for lustiness and virile laughter and sad tales of good lovers and pleasant tales of good livers. He would have been very much bored by Ruskin and Walter Pater if they had explained to him the strange sunset tints of Lippi and Botticelli. He had no pleasure in looking on the dying Middle Ages, but he looked on the living Middle Ages, on a piece of the old uproarious superstition still unbroken, and he hailed it like a new religion. The Dickens character ate pudding to an extent at which the modern mediaevalists turn pale. They do every kind of honour to an old observance, except observing it. They would pay to a church feast every sort of compliment, except feasting. And, as I have said, as were his unconscious relations to our European past, so were his unconscious relations to England. He imagined himself to be, if anything, a sort of cosmopolitan; at any rate, to be a champion of the charms and merits of continental lands against the arrogance of our island. But he was, in truth, very much more a champion of the old and genuine England against that comparatively cosmopolitan England which we have all lived to see. And here again the supreme example is Christmas. Christmas is, as I have said, one of numberless old European feasts, of which the essence is the combination of religion with merrymaking. But among those feasts it is also especially and distinctively English in the style of its merrymaking, and even in the style of its religion. For the character of Christmas, as distinct, for instance, from the continental Easter, lies chiefly in two things. First, on the terrestrial side, the note of comfort rather than the note of brightness, and on the spiritual side, Christian charity rather than Christian ecstasy. And comfort is, like charity, a very English instinct. Nay, comfort is, like charity, an English merit. Though our comfort may and does degenerate into materialism, just as our charity may and does degenerate into laxity and make-believe. This ideal of comfort belongs peculiarly to England. It belongs peculiarly to Christmas. Above all, it belongs preeminently to Dickens, and it is astonishingly misunderstood. It is misunderstood by the continent of Europe. It is, if possible, still more misunderstood by the English of today. On the Continent the restaurateurs provide us with raw beef as if we were savages, yet old English cooking takes as much care as French. And in England has arisen a parvenu patriotism which represents the English as everything but English, as a blend of Chinese stoicism, Latin militarism, Prussian rigidity, and American bad taste. And so England, whose fault is gentility and whose virtue is geniality, England, with her tradition of the great gay gentleman of Elizabeth, is represented to the four quarters of the world, as in Mr. Kipling's religious poems, in the enormous image of a solemn cad. And because it is very difficult to be comfortable in the suburbs have voted that comfort is a gross and material thing. Comfort, especially this vision of Christmas comfort, is the reverse of a gross material thing. It is far more poetical, properly speaking, than the garden of Epicurus. It is far more artistic than the palace of art. It is more artistic because it is based upon a contrast between the fire and wine within the house and the winter and the roaring rains without. It is far more poetical because there is in it a note of defence, almost of war, a note of being besieged by the snow and hail, of making merry in the belly of a fort. The man who said that an Englishman's house is his castle said much more than he meant. The Englishman thinks of his house as something fortified and provisioned, and his very surliness is at root romantic. And this sense would naturally be strongest in wild winter nights, when the lowered portcullis and the lifted drawbridge do not merely bar people out, but bar people in. The Englishman's house is most sacred, not merely when the king cannot enter it, but when the Englishman cannot get out of it. This comfort, then, is an abstract thing, a principle. The English poor shut all their doors and windows till their rooms reek like the Black Hole. They are suffering for an idea. Mere animal hedonism would not dream, as we English do, of winter feasts and little rooms, but of eating fruit in large and idle gardens. Mere sensuality would desire to please all its senses. But to our good dreams this dark and dangerous background is essential. The highest pleasure we can imagine is a defiant pleasure, a happiness that stands at bay. The word comfort is not indeed the right word. It conveys too much of the slander of mere sense. The true word is coziness, a word not translatable. One at least of the essentials of it is smallness. Smallness in preference to largeness. Smallness for smallness' sake. The merrymaker wants a pleasant parlour. He would not give twopence for a pleasant continent. In our difficult time, of course, a fight for mere space has become necessary. Instead of being greedy for ale and Christmas pudding, We are greedy for mere air, and equally